Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. Christian Clemente here, joined today by a special guest on this Wednesday podcast, Cooper Petagna. Cooper, what's up, man?
Not too much, man. Just trying to put a bow on the top 247. Always a fun time of the year. Just got back from Indianapolis last week for the NFL Combine. So you think it slows down after signing day. It just kind of picks up. But happy to be done, man. Hopefully get a little bit of a breather here soon.
Yeah, we've had you on the podcast. I think it was around this time last year. We should have had you on more often since then, but we've been lacking a little bit. That's on us, not you. But for those of the people that are listening that don't know you, explain kind of who you are and what you do at 24/7.
Sure. So I am a national recruiting analyst, one of many at 24/7 Sports, and going into year 3 with the company, which is pretty crazy. Feels like yesterday when I came on, and before that, I won't bore you with all the spots, but I used to be a director of player personnel at a couple of programs. I guess I will. Oregon, Washington, and a handful of others, man. So was fortunate enough to work on that side of things, and now helping Andrew Ivins and the rest of the crew here with the rankings and enjoying it.
Yeah, look, if you want to know why Washington made the national title game, you're looking at him on the screen right there. If you're listening, you're listening to him. That's the straw that stirs the drink right there, Cooper Petagna. But no, seriously, there's not many people out there that I trust more, especially with Auburn targets within the Southeast, the state of Alabama. Not many people I trust more talking than Cooper. Cooper, what goes in? This is the March update for the 2025 class. I think the last update was November, something like that, towards the tail end of these guys' junior season. What goes into a rankings update before we start to break down Auburn's commits and kind of where they stand in the class right now?
Sure. And this is a really important question to answer, and I'm glad you asked it for context purposes. I think a lot of people will say, well, what changed from November to March? And quite honestly, not a lot. There are a handful of combines, obviously Atlanta, where I saw you, the Under Armour Combine, which in 2023, I think was one of the most talented combines that we saw throughout the year. Andrew Ivins just went to Under Armour Miami as well this past weekend, along with IMG, who had their pro day. So there are a lot of new metrics that are involved. And for us, it's really important. Obviously, they have to be able to play football, but our job really at the end of the day is to project where we feel these prospects would get drafted. And if they're not going to get drafted, where are they going to project at the collegiate level? Are they going to be a Power 5 starter? Are they going to be a Group of 5 starter? What does that look like? So for us, it's a game of supplementary data points in this huge puzzle that we're trying to put together. We get more and more pieces. So, I think the other part of that is our process has gotten collectively better and better over the years. And I got to give a ton of credit to Andrew and the job that he's done. And, we've invested in that area, not only in people, but in resources as well, and technology. So for us, you go to November, the last thing I'll say on this is, what we'll do is it's going to take each of us time to have a comprehensive view and feel of every player in the top 247, not to mention the top 247, but another 40 or 50 players that you have to consider for a top 247 ranking as well. So what we'll do is we'll have our position audits. For example, mine this March was defensive line, edge, and linebacker. So front 7 players. And in November, it was different, right? I had athletes, I had 2 other positions as well. So now as you go through, you're starting to get a better feel for other position groups. So I still haven't seen, I've obviously done the homework on the quarterbacks, but there's a handful of positions, receivers, running backs, offensive line, that I have yet to really kind of dive in deeply on. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we're still making decisions as a team. And that's where you are. But the further you get along in the process, the more everybody has a more comprehensive understanding of each other and where they're coming from, the players on the board. So listen, early signing day was in December. We got some time left on the calendar, and this is going to change. It's meant to change. It's a fluid process as we inch our way forward, 9 months from now till 2025 signing day.
We'll just wait until we have 10 signing days, Cooper.
It's coming right around the corner, man.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Before we get into the Auburn guys, let everyone know where they can find the podcast that you and Andrew do. That's one of my favorite, one of the only podcasts I listen to, in all honesty. I'm not a big podcast guy, as I'm sitting here recording one. But I do really enjoy y'all's. And for people that really enjoy recruiting, that love rankings, that love getting intel as well, where can they find that and what can they kind of expect a little bit?
You're gassing us up today, man. You can find us every Tuesday and Wednesday on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. You can also find us wherever you find your podcasts as well. And we enjoy it, man. We're a little bit more on the nerdy side, obviously getting in the weeds. But if you want to know why a player, maybe an Auburn commit, is rising or potentially falling throughout the rankings, that is definitely the place to go. And if you have questions, make sure to do it there, and we'll try to get to it.
Guys, I promise it's a good listen. We'll make sure to link that in the story, make sure to link that in the YouTube as well when we post this podcast. So let's get into it. Let's get into the Auburn guys. Malik Autry, he was the alpha dog of the Under Armour Atlanta camp. He's been Auburn's longest tenured commitment. It's been over a year now. He committed last February. At that time, I think maybe we had 100 guys ranked in 2025, so he was an unranked guy. Showed up on campus. He was massive, obviously 15 minutes down the road. He'd been here before, but quickly bonded with Jeremy Garrett, with Vontrell King-Williams, who has that room now, and they got a good one, and now it's kind of on them to hold on to him.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating to see the quick ascension of Malik Autry. Really, for us, at the end of the day, you look outside of a guy like Elijah Griffin at the top of our board when it comes to defensive linemen, a couple other names that come to mind. You think about guys like Isaiah Gibson, Jarrett Smith, Iosa Epinesa as well. Justice Terry committed to Georgia. We really don't have a body type like Malik Autry. And what I mean by that, if you're not familiar with him, over 6'5.5", 292 pounds, a guy that's a really good athlete, a nimble athlete, but also a powerful athlete as well. I think he's got enough pass rushing upside where he plays the run and the pass equally as well. He is a big body, and he's more than a functional athlete. You'll hear that a lot. People like to talk about that size and athleticism combination. They'll say, well, he's a big body with functional athleticism. This is a really good athlete in Malik Autry. So we love the size. We love the length. He's got 35-inch arms, which would be in the top 90 percentile if he were in the NFL today at his position group. So he also came to Atlanta on top of us really, being convicted in the junior season tape as well. And I thought he had one of the best days there. It was a little bit of a toss-up. We didn't know which way we were going to go with Alpha Dog, but just in terms of the way he moved, and then not to mention he's 292 right now. I think he could hold 315, 320 pretty comfortably. So I think his best football is ahead of him. And guess what? He's going from 89 to number 34, right? So we only have 16 5-stars this time around. The next time we do this, we'll go from 16 to 32. So the type of athlete, the type of player that he is, he's going to be directly in that conversation.
He almost reminds me a little bit, at least frame-wise, of LJ McCray. He has a similar frame to LJ. I wouldn't necessarily compare the play styles quite yet, but if I can think of a guy instantly that Auburn's recruited over the past couple of years, I guess that's what I would probably go with. I don't know. Are there any comparisons for you?
The player comp, and I think a lot of people will probably have to do research on this one, but the one for me personally was Akeem Hicks, a guy that was originally out of Canada, got drafted by the Saints, I believe, in the 3rd round. Had a long 7-8 year NFL career, I believe ended in Chicago, but was a guy that had a similar size frame to Malik Autry and, was a really, really powerful player too. So, I'm not sure where Malik Autry is going to end up. It might not be the top 32, but, part of the strategy right now of ranking these players, it's a ceilings and floors game, right? What I mean by that is we feel really, really comfortable that Malik Autry, granted for something that maybe we can't foresee, is going to have a difficult time just because of, one, the body type, and two, the positional value of kind of falling outside of that top 64 range. So we feel really good about Malik Autry. Like I said, he's still putting together on tape. And guess what? At this point in the process, that's a positive, right? So we feel like he's got a lot of room to grow both on and off the field.
Yeah, the strength of Auburn's class, undoubtedly, they did lose Antonio Coleman over the weekend, but the strength of the class is still the defensive line. Another guy on that list that's moving up, another in-state guy, Jordan Crawford, the big nose tackle, little over 6'1", 300 pounds out of Parker. Huge body. But what's interesting with him, Coop, 17 sacks as a junior. You do not really see that out of a nose tackle.
17 sacks. The other thing about him is, I don't know how I missed him the first time around. I was going through and, I had defensive line and I turned on the tape and I was like, man, am I missing something here? Because, you're going through the combine testing as well. And sure, he's 6'1.5", he's 308. That doesn't jump out at you. But he's another guy with elite length. He's got 35-inch arms, and I don't know how much more room he's got to grow. But the other thing, he's got 10-inch hands. Both him and Malik Autry got these big old paws, and it kind of shows up. People are like, okay, well, what's the obsession with the hand size? Well, when they play with power, and you see it with a guy like Jordan Crawford, he plays with such a good base for a guy his size. He's a really, really good athlete. And I actually think he's position versatile. You mentioned him playing nose tackle. I think you can do a lot of different things with him on the interior. And you think about that the big picture thing, if you zoom out and you have a guy like Malik Autry, you have a guy like Jordan Crawford, those guys can kind of play off of each other a little bit and give Auburn a lot of options in terms of how they want to scheme up at the point of attack. And this is where you're looking for, man. You talk about quick twitch, explosive, being able to penetrate the line of scrimmage. I think the other thing is, I keep talking about the athleticism. He can make plays out of his radius. And what I mean like that, he's just not a straight line, linear, explosive player. He's a pretty nimble athlete, pretty fleet of foot. So, Jordan Crawford, a guy for us, we had ranked coming into it 222. And I'll keep plugging this, right, because we keep talking about the NFL draft, and that's what our rankings are tied into. The draft in a couple months here, there's typically 262 draft picks. For us, we have our top 247, so it almost mirrors it perfectly. Jordan Crawford, essentially, think of it this way, went from a 7th-round draft pick to this update to going all the way up to number 86. So he went from a day 3 player to a day 2 player, right? And that's what we think of him. And I'm excited about him, man. I think he's a heck of a fit. I get more excited thinking about who he's going to play next to him, Malik Autry as well.
The other defensive lineman that Auburn has, Kalen Edwards, another huge body, 6'4", 330. The interesting thing with him, Coop, was Jeremy Garrett went out to go and see him last spring, I believe it was. He was teetering around 360, 370, I believe it was. He was playing O-line and D-line, and he did that in the fall as well. He drops down to 330. Once he gets to that point, Auburn's all in. They take him, and he's the 3rd defensive lineman they have right now. Just kind of what are your thoughts on him at this point?
Pretty interesting cat. I have not dove in on Edwards to the level that I have studied both Autry and Crawford, but I can tell you just kind of buzzing them today. You brought up the weight at 360 pounds, talked about his ability to get down to 330. The thing that I like that Auburn's doing is that I've talked about position flexibility and or position versatility with both Crawford and Autry. And I think you can apply that to Edwards as well, because you talked about the two-way snaps. You see a lot of him playing tackle. He carries his weight exceptionally well, but he's a quick twitch, explosive player who's got no issue moving big bodies off the line of scrimmage. So there's always going to be a role for those guys. I think he's more of a high floor guy. I don't think he's got the ceiling of maybe an Autry or a Jordan Crawford. But these are the type of guys that you win with in the SEC, and they're a necessity. And if you're not careful and you don't recruit these type of players, you can put yourself in a pretty dangerous situation on the defensive line. So, we always talk about Autry and Crawford. Those are going to be the headliners. But in terms of the depth, right, and these guys getting 25, 30 snaps a game, those guys are really important. I think that's what Caleb Edwards is.
I think one of both of our favorite guys, and Auburn's favorite guys for that matter, J.J. Falk, out of Highland Home, obviously the younger brother of Keldrick. Interesting player. Committed as a linebacker. We both think that he's probably an edge rusher. I just really think I think he already is at that height and weight. I think he can grow into that even more. Other schools have liked him as a linebacker as well. But Coop, J.J. Falk, one of the more intriguing players and one of the more talented players that Auburn has right now.
You said the word, the word was intriguing, and we've had, different points of view behind the scenes on Caleb Falk. But, I'm not going to hide on this one, man. I've been a huge fan of Caleb Falk, and especially on the reevaluation here in the audit in the top 247. It's another guy we're going to move up exponentially in our rankings. And he's fascinating from the fact that, you want the athlete to match the tape. And quite honestly, I thought J.J. Falk had some of the best tape that I have seen of any player in this cycle that I have studied. And like I said, there's still a couple of position groups that I haven't gotten to, but you talk about a guy that can do everything. And obviously he's playing at Highland Home, but they play him at every level. They can flex him out over the slot. He's got some tape playing the deep third as a safety as well. He plays second level off the ball. You can play him on the ball as an edge rusher. The position utility is one of his most elite traits. I think his position flex, and yeah, I think a lot of people sometimes get uneasy when they don't know what bucket to put him in. Is he a linebacker or he's an edge? Well, I love his ability off the edge. I think he's got a really good feel for the game. And he's a dynamic athlete. He's a two-way guy that looks as comfortable on offense as he does on defense. He plays the game really, really fast. I think the thing that tips the hand on J.J. Falk being an edge guy is, one, he's a 4.91 guy that came off of testing a couple weeks ago in Atlanta. Second is he's a long strider, and I think in space, sometimes he can get compromised in short area. So I think off the edge, all those things kind of point to him being a 3-4 stand-up outside linebacker. And I think he's got excellent bend. I think he can run the hoop. I think he's very sudden, and he's a proactive player. What I mean about that is that he has a game plan in his pass rush, and he can beat you with speed, quickness. And I think the other thing for him is just putting on weight to that frame. And he's got a 81+ inch wingspan. He's going to be able to put on weight, no issue. Is being able to play to that frame size as well. So I think the play strength, the speed to power ability, if he can add that to the pass rushing repertoire, then you got an all-in-one guy in Caleb Falk, man. And I'll tell you this, like, he's got better tape than his brother did at this point. And I love Keldrick. Now, Keldrick might actually be the better athlete. And I think that's actually the case. JJ, in terms of, and I'm not taking anything away from him, I think at times you turn on the tape and you're just like, wow, this guy's so dynamic. There's some other things, maybe speed, that you wish were a little bit better. But outside of that, man, I'm not nitpicking. I love the player. I think pound for pound, he's one of the best in the country.
The thing I always go back to is, when Keldrick committed to Florida State the first time around, talking with Jason, he said, look, I think JJ might be better. So you got to stay on Keldrick no matter what, just to make sure you have that relationship for JJ down the line. Wish we had Jason on the podcast, but he's taking care of some other things right now. We'll go from some big dudes to easily the smallest dude in Auburn's class and one of the smaller dudes in the country, but also one of the fastest guys in the country. Auburn's most recent commitment, Devin Williams, the cornerback out of Buford. Small frame, but really fast.
Yeah, small frame, really fast. You said it. I think he's hovering around like 160 pounds right now. I'm scrambling to go find my notes on him.
We have him listed at 5'10", 165. I think he's probably closer to 5'9" and probably closer to 160.
He came in Atlanta just a couple weeks ago and measured at, 5'9", 3/4, 157, right? So I think a lot of people immediately will go to, okay, is he big enough? And I think that's an incredibly fair question. The good thing about him is that he's playing at a school like Buford in Georgia. I think one of the best schools and programs in the country, especially when it comes to development. This guy, a two-way standout, being able to get it done on both sides, and a dynamic player who actually ran pretty well, owns a 10.6, sub 10.7 in the 100 meters. So he's a dynamic guy. And the other thing is he's a football player. The biggest knock on him is going to be the size, right? And I think for him, he really kind of fits into one bucket. That's going to be that nickel position. But if he can put on the weight, which is a big question right now, can he get to 170, 175 pounds, which I think he can. He's got a 6'1" plus wingspan at 5'9", which is a good indicator. He's got a pretty thick trunk too. So seeing him in person, man, it's easy to gloss over him because of the height and because of the frame a little bit, but the short area quickness, the change of direction ability, and I think just the instincts playing the football really, really jump out when you watch the tape. And I think he's got a lot of traits that translate to being a really good man-to-man, super heady nickel at the next level. I think that's what he's going to have to be. But in terms of value, in terms of ranking, that's certainly going to ding him a little bit. That being said, he's going to be a really, really good football player on Saturdays. And if you can answer those questions about his size, I don't see why he can't carry that over into Sunday somewhere in the future.
Moving over to the offensive side, just a couple of guys to hit on here. Three, the two tight ends, Ryan G on the left for those that are watching on YouTube, and then Hollis Davidson, two very, very big tight ends, two very different tight ends, I would say. Ryan G, more of the blocking type. For those that know Auburn really well, Luke Deal, that's really who Ryan G is to me. And then Hollis Davidson almost a big wide receiver at this point, in all honesty. Auburn has those two and is still looking for a third tight end. But Coop, just give me the rundown on what you think about those two a little bit.
Yeah.
I know you're not super at tight end yet, but
Right. Ryan G, for me, just, you and I were kind of talking about it before the call, but traditional wide tight end, I think it's funny. You turn on the tape and immediately it's about 2 or 3 blocks, right? And this guy's in line, kind of traditional. You don't see a lot of those guys nowadays, but they are super necessary for the SEC, being able to bang, especially when you want to lean on that run game a little bit. So, in terms of developmental upside, in terms of where does this guy kind of fit in the rankings, I think we're pretty comfortable with where we have him. More high floor than ceiling. Certainly a guy that's going to fit a role, I think, can develop into a multi-year starter, but it's never going to be sexy, but you're going to be glad that you had him at the end of the day. I think the other one, from what I remember, a little bit more dynamic in terms of the pass catching upside, and maybe a little bit more questions when it comes to the inline ability. But in terms of those guys, you can see, even with this picture right here, in stature, pretty similar, and 2 complementary skill sets, right? One more that you'll probably see in 12 personnel and another that you'll probably see in 11, right? So that's what it comes down to when you're building the positional room. Those guys got to be different.
Last one, offensive lineman Spencer Doland. Tell me about him a little bit.
Yeah, I like him. Big kid, buzzed him this morning, left tackle. Nasty kid. You turn on the tape against Oxford, I thought he did some really nice things. Big, functional, developmental athlete. I got to figure out what bucket we're going to put him in. I think we got him in the 87, 88 range right now.
Sounds right, yeah.
Got to get some verifieds on him, but he's the type of guy, man. These offensive linemen, like, if you have the size and you can bend and you have the functional athleticism, then you got a shot. And I'll tell you this, man, Auburn only has 8 commits right now. None of it might be flashy, but think about the guys I talked about. Autry was a guy that was virtually unranked, right, when he came across our radar. Now he's the number 34 player in the country. Jordan Crawford, we had at 136. Now he's number 86. And then you had Caleb Falk at number 118. Now he's number 43. All right. So you talk about good scouting. Being able to find guys that, relative to where they're ranked, are now 3 top 100 players. Tip of the cap, I thought Auburn, honestly, was probably my favorite class last year, Oregon and Auburn. And you can see it, man. You can see it coming from a mile away. They got to get the quarterback position right. They probably need another year of building it, and then building it through the portal as well. That being said, the future talent composition of this roster being put together right now is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's basically the last question that I wanted to hit on with you, was just from a distance, what have you liked about Auburn, the way they've done things? I know you're a big fan of some of the recent hires, guys like Will Redmond that you're familiar with, and the personnel staff. Just what have you liked that they've done on the field, and what have you liked staff-wise and recruiting-wise that they've done since Hugh Freeze has arrived? They've
been intentional, and, intentionality for me, as somebody who works in player personnel and studies roster building, I always go back to that. If you can see the vision of every player that a program takes, or the majority of players that a program takes, that's the biggest sign of a program that knows what they're doing, in my opinion, when it comes to roster building, talent identification, and talent evaluation. Doesn't always mean that you agree on the value of the player, but it does mean say, okay, I can see what they're doing here. And you think about every player that we talked about 3 defensive linemen, another guy on the front 7. And here's the thing. What was the theme with the defensive linemen? You got 3 guys on the interior that all have position flexibility. One of those guys that is outside of the top 247 has the 2-way snaps. Auburn telling them, hey, we're not going to take your commitment until you get from 360 down to 330 tells me a lot about that program already, because it means that they have standards. Caleb Falk, obviously I talked about the position versatility there. Another one from the state of Alabama. I think they've done a tremendous job in the state of Alabama. And I think right now the door is more open than it's ever been with Kalen DeBoer being the new head coach in Tuscaloosa. Not to say that Kalen DeBoer might not have a ton of success, but he's not Nick Saban. Nobody is, right? And that's not a slight at him. That's just that's a positive kind of reinforcement for Auburn and where they are right now. And, you look at some of the other takes that they've had is there is continuity in what they're doing. And if you're trying to build depth and if you're trying to raise the floor of your program, the best thing you can do is continue to take players at a high standard and continue that as well year in and year out. It's not good enough for Auburn just to do what they did last year and say, you know what, we'll circle back in 2 years, right? We turned it up 1 year. That was good enough. Auburn, quite frankly, is incredibly capable of doing what they did last year every cycle. And that's what gets me excited. And if they're able to do that, and which the early returns in this 25 cycle is that they have not taken their foot off the gas pedal, then you're cooking. And Hugh Freeze can coach. And I get excited about Walker White. And, and you think about having that piece, and sure, it might be 2 to 3 years down the line, and they might have to figure out a way to bridge the gap in the meantime. But I mean, Cam Coleman, you think about some of the other guys, Perry Thompson, Bryce Kane, Malcolm Simmons, DeMarcus Riddick. I mean, you go down the line, especially what they've done defensively, and you're like, okay, these guys got something. So I love the way they're building through high school, man, and they've been aggressive, and they're a program. I say all this to say they are a program right now that is really recruiting with a top 3, top 4 urgency in the country. And if you have that and you combine that with all the things that I talked about earlier and being dedicated to that height, weight, speed philosophy and doing your homework in state, it sounds simplistic, but that's really the answer at the end of the day.
Coop, I want to page you on one more extra real quick, and I didn't prep you for this at all, so that's on me. But take a pick of another state of Alabama guy that you really like that we have ranked pretty highly. Derek Smith, Eric Winters, Fagans, Jared Smith, whoever. Who's the guy in the state of Alabama that Auburn's recruiting that you like a lot?
I'm glad you brought him up. My brain is mush right now going through the top 7 for the last 2 days. I like Eric Winters a lot. I'm not really sure what he is. I talked to a team today that thought, he might be more of a defensive back than he is a safety. He doesn't have a ton of tape at linebacker, plays quarterback, plays running back, plays receiver. He's super smooth kid. He is a natural mover, which I really like about him as well. Another guy for us, we're still trying to figure out his neighborhood, but I think he's definitely a day 2 guy, but a really good player. And I talk about that position versatility. He's the type of guy that I think you could split out, put in man-to-man on a bigger body tight end receiver, and he'd be able to match up. It's kind of what I love about his skill set. He also ran low 4.6s, which a lot of people might, raise their eyebrows and say, hey, that doesn't sound good. Yeah, compared to guys in the NFL, that doesn't sound good. But also that would be in the bottom 30% of NFL starters at the position, right? And the kid's only 17 years old. So you talk about a guy with versatility, modern day speed and space backer. I think he's got to answer the question of physicality between the tackles. But if he can do that, man, I like his skill set a lot.
He's great. Have you seen some of his basketball stuff from this past year?
I have not seen the b-ball stuff.
When you get through with this rankings update, check it out. He state title game, they just played against Hoover. He went up against Dwayne Brown, who's 6'9", like 250 out of Hoover. He'll go SEC somewhere. He held his own pretty well out there against him. It was a fun matchup to watch. He's a fun player.
I love it, man. I'll dig into that as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Send it to me.
Well, thank you, Coop, for hopping on. Again, plugged it earlier in the show. Plug it again. Where can they find your podcast with Andrew Ivins? Everyone needs to be listening to it.
24/7 Sports YouTube channel. You can find it under podcast there. And if you want to listen to the audio version of that, you can find it Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. It is called the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. As basic as they come, the most vanilla podcast name. But I promise you the content is worth your time.
Hey, it does well for Google searches. So there you go.
The whole point, I've been told.
Well, thank you, Coop, for hopping on. Like I said earlier, look, we've got to get you on the show more, just not even just to going down the list of guys, but just to chop it up a little bit, talk football, because I stand by it. There's not many people out there that I trust more talking football with and that know more about the game and know more about recruiting and evaluations, stuff like that than you. So really appreciate you hopping on. Everybody, hope you guys listened or enjoyed listening to this, and we will catch you guys probably next week again with another recruiting podcast. Probably get Jason back on. So we'll catch you guys soon. And thanks